Whether you like it or not, our lives revolve around work. Whether you're working a job or running a business, you're trading a significant portion of your life for money. We then use that money to buy food and sustain our lives. This is why you must view every tax the government levies on you as them effectively murdering a part of you. A 1% tax in exchange for some security, clean water, roads and firefighters is a worthwhile trade. A 4% tax is still a decent deal. But when they take 25% of your paycheck, it means the government is essentially taking 19 years of your life. At a 50% tax rate, with the average American lifespan of 77 years, they're stripping away nearly 40 years of your life. But Jack, I'm not rich. I only earn $30,000 and pay just 7% in federal income tax, plus a bit of state tax. I hate to break it to you, but when you add up all the other ways the government gets its grubby hands on your money, sales tax, property tax, estate tax, capital gains tax, payroll tax, if you tally all these taxes, the average middle-income American is paying about 23% of their income, which equates to 17 years of their life slaving away for the government. If you manage to climb the ladder and earn more, they only punish you for doing better. If you start making $200,000 to $300,000 a year, they'll try to steal 20 to 30% of that, which translates to about 34 years of your life. If you earn $500,000 or $1 million a year, the government murders half your life. 50% of what you worked so hard for, money you could have used, is gone. If the US government were like the Swiss government, it'd be a different story. The Swiss do take 32% in taxes, but their society is the closest thing to a utopia I've ever seen. Nearly everything is pristine and safe. If our taxes were spent like that, I might be less upset. But in America, it's not like that. Here, the average American pays nearly the same tax rate, 23%. And for what? California's fires run out of water. Tents for the homeless cost $30,000 a year, with no help for hurricane or toxic rail disaster victims. Yet we keep sending more money to Ukraine and Israel. They use our money to scare us with fake UFOs over cities, while 107,000 people die from fentanyl each year, equivalent to a 9/11 scale tragedy. That's what we're paying for, because we're certainly not paying for good roads, safe streets, or well-funded firefighters. As people say, taxes are meant to fund things like a $25,000 drag show seminar for Ecuadorian and Venezuelan immigrants, $2.3 million to study if cats prefer Zoom over FaceTime, $6.9 million for a smart toilet that identifies anal fingerprints, or $1.8 million to study the psychological impact of losing at rock, paper, scissors. There are many, many more absurd examples. If I told you we could achieve a Swiss-style utopia in America, or at least come close, without even needing income tax, if we've already collected enough tax revenue to afford the best roads, the safest streets, and well-funded firefighters. But instead we spend it on injecting cocaine into puppies in a $2.5 million study. The greatest threat to our freedom isn't China, Europe's wars, or whatever fear-mongering they're pushing this week. The greatest threat to our freedom is the taxman. Because the taxman with a gun decides how many years you get to live, and it's been that way for years. But it's not just spineless bureaucrats and politicians to blame. Billions of dollars are funneled into someone's pockets. What's being exposed might be the greatest collective fraud in human history. Every dollar wasted could be used to make your life safer and better, or the lives of the less fortunate. We'll expose it all in this documentary, but to do so, we must go all in, back to that 1% to 2% tax. The British levied these 1% to 2% taxes not on your income or paycheck. No, these were just taxes on small things like tea and legal documents. Yet early Americans were willing to give their lives to break free from that 1% to 2% tax. Oh, how far we've strayed. Once the revolution succeeded and America gained independence, guess what? The new government quickly started taxing people. Without taxes, how would they build hospitals or schools? How would they defend America from the British? Yes, we've been using the same tax argument for over 240 years. But here's the thing. In the newly independent America, taxes were very different. There was no income tax. Instead, they taxed imported goods and added excise taxes on non-essentials like alcohol and tobacco. Simple. No one deducted money before you saw your paycheck, and the IRS didn't hound you. But in 1861, everything changed. The Civil War broke out. People stopped buying imported tea or fancy fabrics, and tariff and excise tax revenues plummeted. The government was in deep trouble. Worse, a massive war was insanely expensive. The government spent $5.2 billion, equivalent to over $100 billion today. If the government couldn't pay to keep soldiers fighting, it would collapse. So in 1861, America introduced its first income tax. If you earned over $800 a year, you paid 3% to Uncle Sam. Just 1 year later, they lowered the minimum income threshold to $600, and it worked. But things got interesting because, according to the government, these new income taxes were only temporary. Once the war ended and the economy recovered, this new income tax would vanish. Shockingly, a decade after it was created, they kept their promise, and the income tax disappeared. But you know what that did? It made people think income taxes weren't a big deal. They saw wartime income taxes as no issue. Plus, like an addict, the government got hooked. For 10 years, it skimmed a portion from nearly every working-class American's wages. Suddenly, all that dried up and something had to be done. Think about it. As a politician, the easiest way to stay in power is to give people free stuff. The more free stuff you give, the more likely they'll vote for you again. But to give away free stuff, you need money. And that trusty old income tax gave you money. So in 1894, Congress thought, well, everyone was fine with income taxes during the Civil War. Maybe we can bring back a little income tax now. No big deal, just 2% on anyone earning over $4,000. I mean, they handled more during the war, so what's 2% now? Boy, were they in for a surprise. Back then, income taxes weren't part of the Constitution. They were just emergency measures people accepted for good reasons, like the Civil War. But in 1894, there was no war. So when the government started imposing a 2% income tax, it hit serious trouble. Eventually, even the Supreme Court ruled the tax unconstitutional. The government was back to square one, with no income tax to fund its spending. But the government wasn't going to sit idle. They needed that money. So they regrouped and realized if the only reason they couldn't impose an income tax was because it wasn't in the Constitution, why not just amend the Constitution? In 1913, that's exactly what they did. The 16th Amendment was ratified, allowing Congress to impose an income tax. You know the best part? Just 1 year after the income tax was made permanent, World War I broke out, giving the government the perfect excuse to need more money. So even though this new income tax wasn't just some emergency measure like during the Civil War, it sure felt like it. Even though the income tax was now permanent, people were distracted by the war. They didn't care. They just assumed they were paying this tax to help America win. Even better, as World War I raged on, the government didn't have to stop at 1%, 2%, or even 7% tax rates. Within a few years, they raised the top income tax rate to 15%, because if we don't tax you, evil will win, so do your patriotic duty. By 1917, the top rate hit 67%. But hey, at least you funded the righteous cause of democracy. The Pandora's box had just been opened. As long as the public's income tax was tied to some major dramatic event, they wouldn't mind arbitrary tax hikes. The next 60 years were filled with chaos and conflict. The Great Depression. We need taxes to save the economy. Even better, we need taxes to fund Social Security. It's for your own good. By 1936, the top tax rate hit 70.9%. But why stop there years after the Great Depression? World War II broke out. This time, the government got proactive, raising taxes even before America entered the war. And from 1940 to 1963, they kept high tax rates as long as possible, with the top rate hitting 91% several times. More and more people were classified as eligible taxpayers. But by then, income taxes were so normalized that when the government went even further, no one noticed. We could say it's the worst tax in history, the payroll tax. With the payroll tax, your boss isn't just the person paying you, but also the government's trusty little tax collector. Even before you touch your money, your boss is legally forced to deduct the payroll tax and hand the rest to you. This leaves you no chance to try and save on taxes. But that's not the worst part. The only reason people accepted a 91% tax rate, the only reason people accepted payroll taxes in the first place, was because they thought it would be temporary. It's been 80 years and clearly America hasn't recovered from World War II because these taxes are still here. See, the government cracked the code. They kept finding new excuses to tax people. The income tax was never going away again. First, it was the Korean War, the Cold War, the Vietnam War. By the time wars and terror rolled around, no one even remembered a time when income taxes didn't exist. It had become the norm. Fast forward to today, in 2023, the US government collected $4.5 trillion, with over half, 54%, coming from personal income taxes, 30% from payroll taxes, 11% from corporate income taxes and excise taxes, and just 1.8% from tariffs. How much did the government spend in the same period? $6.2 trillion, nearly a $2 trillion shortfall. But according to politicians, it's never enough. We need more money to give away more free stuff. We must raise taxes further. But is that true? In 2023, did America really spend $6.2 trillion to run the country? Did they really need that much money? Did they really need to get nearly all their tax revenue from your income and payroll? Absolutely not. Ask anyone who's used public services in the past year. They'll tell you $6.2 trillion couldn't possibly have gone to anything truly important. So let's break it down. The government insists that raising income taxes is the only way to increase federal revenue, the only way to increase how much tax money they get. But what about tariffs? Back in the 19th century, tariffs, taxes on goods entering the US, accounted for nearly 100% of government tax revenue. It basically meant that if other countries wanted to make money off our people, they had to pay for it. But by 2019, tariffs were close to 0% of government revenue before Trump took office. The average US tariff was about 2%. In 2023, we imported $3.8 trillion worth of goods, which means at a 2% tariff, the total tariff revenue was roughly $80 billion. And at 25%, that would bring in an extra $1 trillion in revenue. That's $1 trillion less the government needs to take from your paycheck. But won't tariffs make everything more expensive? For a while, imported goods would cost more, but you'd also pay 0% income tax. So, if you don't want to spend your extra cash on pricey imports, you can choose not to buy them and save the money instead of being forced to hand it over at gunpoint. That's why Trump raised tariffs on China, Canada, and Mexico. And that's just tariffs. What about actually cutting spending? How much could the government save by tightening its belt? They don't call it waste, they call it improper payments. But in 2023, the government lost over $236 billion to improper payments, billions vanishing into thin air due to government incompetence. Fix that and we're at $1.2 trillion saved. But that's not the end goal. Every year we spend about $1.6 trillion on public health care, and it turns out about 25% of that ends up wasted or lost. That's another $400 billion in waste. So now we're at $1.6 trillion saved. Then there's the Pentagon, with its $840 billion budget, failing its 7th consecutive audit. But no worries, because they're making progress. Quote, "Momentum is on our side. And the entire department is firmly committed to and believes we can achieve an unmodified audit opinion. Yeah, because the Pentagon believing they'll eventually pass an audit is what matters most. How much waste would Elon Musk and Doge find in the Pentagon? Let's say we find $200 billion in waste. Now we're at $1.8 trillion saved, almost hitting the $2 trillion deficit target, and that's just the start. Elon Musk recently posted that Doge has found nearly $4.7 trillion in federal payments that are completely untraceable. How much of that is fraud? How much is spent on things that could be cut? Beyond that, all the wasted spending, Elon Musk has already identified all the useless federal employees he's firing. He could easily save $2 trillion or more. With that revenue, we could easily save Trump? He's hinted at it before, but I wouldn't count on it. Most importantly, even if he does lower income taxes, he might do it again. But the genie's already out of the bottle. Once he's out of office, they'll surely keep raising taxes and increasing spending again. That's why you can't rely on Trump or any politician to save the world. Because the only long-term solution is to take your fate into your own hands. To do that, you must understand how the tax game works. Because make no mistake, it is a game. In the end, politicians may pass tax laws, but those politicians answer to their donors, the rich. You see, Trump has a famous quote about not paying taxes being smart, and there's a reason for that. Or maybe he didn't want the American people watching tonight to know he paid no federal taxes, because the only years we've seen are the ones when he had to submit taxes to the state for a casino license, and the state showed he paid no federal income tax. That's because while the rich can't stop every tax from becoming law, they do have a say in how tax laws are written. They ensure they can exploit every possible loophole. He complained that Donald Trump exploited tax laws, so why didn't she change them? Why didn't you change them when you were a senator? The reason you didn't is that all your friends took advantage just like I did. And I do have some provisions in the tax code, frankly, that we could change, but you won't change it, because all those people give you money so you can run negative ads about Donald Trump. Ouch. Look at Trump's massive tax cuts in 2017. In 2017, the wealthiest Americans got an average tax cut of thousands, while the middle class got a measly $500 tax break. That's why, while the rich do have the highest tax rates, the ones hit hardest are always the middle class. As you saw earlier, most of the government's money comes from income taxes. Guess who gets hit hardest by income taxes? On the surface, it seems like the rich get hit hardest because their income tax rates are the highest. But in reality, the rich usually don't earn that much money. The rich are typically business owners and investors, not employees. This means most of their money doesn't come from wages. Famously, Elon Musk's salary at Tesla is $0. Jack Dorsey's salary was $0 for years. Mark Zuckerberg's salary is $1. Larry Page and Sergey Brin's salaries were $1 for years while running Google. Why? Because wages are subject to brutal payroll taxes, and then you still have to pay income tax. That's not conducive to building wealth. So instead of taking salaries, they get paid in stock options, dividends, their company's values grow, and their investments generate cash, all taxed at much lower rates. When you have businesses and assets, your business can even borrow money using the business as collateral. The beauty of this is you get cash, and since it's your business, you set the interest rate. Guess what? You don't pay taxes on that cash because it's considered a loan. That's what all the richest elites in America do. They don't pay taxes, don't sell their company stock, and still get billions in cash. That's why working for wages, whether at McDonald's or elsewhere, is a losing game. Not only is your earning potential capped by your labor, but the taxman is guaranteed to squeeze you. That's why, as you saw in that chart earlier, the richer someone is, the less they earn from wages. Make no mistake, the government knows this. They know income and payroll taxes hurt the lower and middle classes the most. But they do it for simple reasons. First, the rich are the ones donating to politicians, so they get all the loopholes. Second, Business owners and investors are the ones creating the most economic growth and jobs, so the government wants to incentivize them with lower taxes. That's what the tax code is really about. It's a mass incentive system. The government needs economic growth, which comes mostly from business owners and investors, so they incentivize you to become one. Meanwhile, if you're an employee, they punish you more harshly. That's why if you really want to lower your taxes, no matter who you are or who's in office, the first step is to follow this basic incentive. You must stop being just an employee. You must start a side business. Because frankly, if you stay an employee, there's little you can do to lower your taxes. You're set up to lose by the tax code. But if you choose to start a business, not only will it help you earn more money, you'll end up paying less in taxes. But that's just the first step. If you noticed in that chart earlier, the top 1% of earners get 22% of their income from their businesses. The first step I mentioned is starting a side business. But if you look closely, another big chunk of their income comes from capital gains and dividends, money they earn by investing in stocks and other assets that pay dividends. This is critical because those are taxed as capital gains taxes, which are much lower than income taxes, ranging from 0 to 20%. That's why the rich invest so much, not just because of compound interest, but because the tax rate is so much lower. Obviously, to invest in a mix of investments, you need a lot of cash. That's why the business you start must have ultra-high profit margins. The most important profit margin is one that gives you enough cash to not only enjoy life, but also have enough left over to invest in traditional investments. So, the second step to lowering your taxes is to choose a business with ultra-high profit margins so you can start earning income from investments, which are taxed less. Another thing you must remember is that employees don't just pay payroll taxes. If you employ people in the US, you have to pay unemployment taxes, social security taxes, and more for them. So whatever business you start must not require full-time US employees. You must be able to hire only contractors, whether in the US or abroad, to avoid all those employee taxes. This also makes your life easier and your business more profitable in every way. So the third step is to choose a business that doesn't rely on full-time US employees. Plus, by hiring contractors, you not only avoid paying taxes for them, but they can also take tax deductions like you to lower their tax burden, instead of being forced to pay taxes before even seeing their paycheck. Finally, to lower your tax burden, the business you choose must be location independent. This means it shouldn't be tied to one place. You should be able to run it from anywhere. This not only makes your lifestyle easier so you don't have to stay home all the time, but it also means you can earn money from anywhere. By being location independent, if your state or country raises taxes, you can leave whenever you want. The best example is Puerto Rico, a US territory that's become a tax haven for Americans. As a US citizen, you can move there for 6 months a year and pay just 4% income tax and 0% on capital gains taxes, with no other taxes. That's incredible. But the only reason business owners can move there is because their businesses can operate from anywhere. That's why location independence is so critical for a business. Even if you don't want to move to Puerto Rico, maybe you want to move to a lower tax state, or later, give up your citizenship entirely to move to a no-tax country. Whatever lowers your taxes, these 4 basic rules apply. 1. You must follow the tax code's incentives and start a side business. 2. You must choose a business with ultra-high profit margins, so you have leftover cash to invest in income-generating assets, lowering your tax rate. 3. You must choose a business that doesn't rely on full-time US employees. 4. The business you choose must be location independent. That's why I love my business. So hit that subscribe button below if you want more everyday life stuff like this. What does this story remind you of? Share your thoughts, drop a comment below,